Back to our main story now and the trade war between the U.S. and China. For more, we can speak to Moshe Lander, senior lecturer at economics at Calgary's Concordia University. Hello to you, Moshe. When it's all said and done and the textbooks are writing about this trade war, what's the title of that chapter going to be?
A stupid period in human history, and self-inflicted at that. It was completely avoidable. This should never have happened. I don't know how to state it clearly enough. This is just bad news all around.
And that seems to echo some of the sentiments we're hearing out of Beijing today that are questioning the strategy or the reasoning that's going on in Washington.
Yeah, look, China's not innocent in all of this, but at least in this particular case, they were provoked, and their response was fully foreseeable. It's not like China was just going to sit there and thank the Americans for their tariffs and stand by and say, I hope we can get rid of them. It was of course, going to escalate into a trade war. And I have to feel that the White House knew that it was going to escalate into a trade war. So their response is measured given the circumstances, but they can afford to play a long game and sit this one out. They have the nationalist fervor that we've seen before when they feel that they've been wronged, and that's going to surface here again. And if they have to wait this out or escalate alongside the U.S., they'll be happy to do so, even at the expense of economic growth for them.
So in a showdown between the world's two biggest economies, who blinks first? Is it going to be the U.S.?
It is going to be the U.S., and part of the reason is because China can play the long game, but part of it is because the Americans have already blinked. And so if you were to sit down at the negotiating table with them right now, why would you concede? You saw what they did to the stock market. You saw what they do to the global economy. You saw how enraged people became. And then when they realized that this was a mess of their own doing, they backed away. Even though they said they're going to give it 90 days, they can keep rotating those 90 days for another 11 times until Trump is out of office and say, well, we never got around to it. I would never negotiate at this point and concede on anything, especially if you're a large economy like China where you can afford to take that position.
And at which point are we genuinely concerned about a global slowdown? Are we already there, or is it going to be a little bit later?
It has to last a little bit longer, right? Just because we've had this going on now for a couple of weeks doesn't mean that that's going to tank all of 2025. There's 52 weeks in the year. But there is going to be a point where for China and the U.S., they are probably for most of the advanced economies either number one or number two in terms of export markets and number one or number two in terms of import markets. Certainly here in Canada, they are number one and number two. So the longer that their trade war lasts, even though Canada might be on the outside, even though the EU might be on the outside, the more it's going to start to drag because we're going to lose major markets for our goods and services, and we're going to have a more difficult time acquiring goods and services from our two main partners.
Yeah, and in the U.S. this week, we saw a lot of anger about how this was all handled. Some Democrats saying it looked like it could have been market manipulation. Others saying the trade secretary was not on the same page with the president. The president seemed to be announcing measures on social media the trade secretary wasn't even aware of.
You can't be surprised, though, right? That seems to be the way that Trump runs his business. Certainly going to be the way that he runs his government. I'm not surprised either, though, to hear that the Democrats are upset. Of course they would be upset. What's more interesting to me is to see that now there are some mainstream Republicans that are starting to speak up saying, I don't think this was handled particularly well. If his own party, who's afraid of him, is starting to get the confidence to speak up, that's where it becomes a worrying sign, because their unconditional support of him is what allowed him to do this in the first place. But now that they're seeing the consequences, they might want for a little more oversight. And we've started to see Congress push back saying, maybe we should take back control of tariffs, which is really a congressional decision, and not allow the president to have total control over how you set the trade agenda. But yes, it does look very suspicious at the way that he handled things. And there certainly seems to be a lack of communication from all ends of the White House. We saw that in the press conference when the repealing of the tariffs were announced, and that poor man that was standing out front in the West Wing looked like he was shoved out there rather than going out there willingly.
And for those of us who might not be financially savvy, are there any thresholds or indicators we should be looking for, whether it's from U.S. Treasury yields or anything, about that are sort of like major red flags, a certain point we do not want to get to?
Well, the thing is that I don't think that there's any point that we cross that we can't come back from. Remember that we've had COVID, we had a financial crisis, we had a dot-com crash at the turn of the century, and of course we had a Great Depression that was 100 years ago. And every time we come back. So even if inflation numbers start to rise, even if unemployment starts to rise, GDP goes down, the stock market falls, all of these things will eventually reverse themselves. The issue then is how fast can it bounce back? And I think that the longer this lasts, the harder it is to bounce back. But it will come back eventually. We, I guess, just have to play the long game ourselves.
All right, Moshe, thank you so much for your time. Moshe Lander joining us from Calgary.